Hello, everybody, and welcome on this rainy night. Thank you for being here. I am Valerie Paley, Senior Vice President and Sue Ann Weinberg, Director of the Patricia D. Klingenstein Library at the New York Historical Society. And it is so amazing when I can get all those words out in one breath. I am also the founding director of the Center for Women's History, and I'm so delighted to have you all here. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Louise Mirror, our president and CEO, Agnes Sue Tang, chair of the Board of Trustees, and Pam Schaffler, our chair emerita, as well as all of our trustees. Joyce B. Cowan, whose gallery you will see yonder, Diane Max and the late Adam Max, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Along with our Chairman's Council, our members, and our many other generous donors, none of the work of New York Historical would be possible without your continued and committed support. So, as the founding director of the center, I am proud of the growth we've achieved here. In only a few short years, we've been able to accomplish so much in terms of scholarship, education, programs, collecting, and not least of all, exhibitions, all of which foreground women's critical role in American history. The new Kara Walker show is but one of them, and we are so excited that you're here to witness a sneak peek of it tonight. Tonight's program, Making Black History Public, will run approximately 45 minutes long, followed by a Q&A. We invite you after the program to continue to enjoy some wine and food, even during the program if you like, and we offer you a special treat, this sneak peek. The exhibition will open to the public on Friday. And now, I am delighted to introduce our panel for the evening. Pamela Council is an interdisciplinary artist who uses sculpture, print, performance, and writing to create multisensory tributes and dedications that provide catharsis and play with perception. These dedications, including their series Fountains for Black Joy, serve as sites of deep care and tend to memory and history. Pamela Council has created commissions for the Studio Museum in Harlem and Times Square Alliance, a recipient of the 2017 Joan Mitchell Painters and Sculptors Grant and a 2022 Williams College Bicentennial Medalist. Council has been awarded several residencies. They hold a BA from Williams College and an MFA from Columbia University. They are an adjunct assistant professor at Brooklyn College. Kendal Henry is an artist and curator who lives in New York City and for over 30 years has specialized in the field of public art. He illustrates that public art can be used as a tool for social engagement, civic pride, and economic development through the projects and programs he's initiated in the U.S. and internationally. He's currently the Assistant Commissioner of Public Art at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and an adjunct professor at New York University Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. Kendal served as the Director of Culture and Economic Development for the City of Newburgh, New York, where he created the region's first Percent for Art program. Prior to that post, he was Manager of Arts Programs at the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, MTA, Art and Design, for 11 years, where he oversaw the MTA's permanent art projects, which are extraordinary, served as a member of the MTA's in-house design team, and produced temporary exhibitions at Grand Central Terminal. Kendal was also elected to serve 2 3-year terms on the Americans for the Arts Public Art Network Council. Moderating the program are my great colleagues, Allison Robinson and Ksenia M. Soboleva, co-curators of Kara Walker, Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War, annotated. Allison is the New York Historical's Mellon Foundation postdoctoral fellow in women's history and public history at New York Historical, and Ksenia is the Mellon Foundation postdoctoral fellow in gender and LGBTQ plus history. We are thrilled to have these 4 of us with us to get today and together, and I will now turn the conversation over to our moderators to get things going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you, Pamela and Kendall, for joining us. We're really thrilled, and thank you to everyone here for trekking up to the New York Historical Society in the rain. So, the question I wanted to start with is very broad, and it's really what do we mean when we talk about public art, and what does it entail to make something public? Is it putting it out in this public sphere, or reaching a public audience? And also, what defines those two concepts that are, I imagine, constantly shifting over time?
Um, Thanks for having me. I'm really grateful to be here, to be able to have this conversation. It's like only my second public talk since making public art. So I'm really nervous about answering these big questions like what is public art? I think for me, it's about welcoming a broader audience, and welcoming chance. So, people are encountering the work in a space that they use, within their daily lives, unlike maybe a museum or gallery. Um, and it's also about a particular political engagement and an engagement with power structures that can't happen in interior spaces, and the environment also, which is another political thing. Yeah, I think that's my answer for now. Yeah.
So I'm gonna give a more technical-ish answer. Um, so yeah, I work in public art, obviously, and one of the ways we try to describe it is by dividing it slightly into two categories. One is art in public place, and that means that taking artwork, any kind of artwork, and putting it in the public environment. This is very important because many of us, general population, us, um, do not interact with artwork in museums and galleries. For some of us, it's intimidating. And the idea of taking that work and putting it out into the public exposes, a lot of those interesting things that are art, conversations that our artists are having with art to the general public. So that's art in public place. But when we say public art, and again, this is a technical term, in addition to what Pamela was describing, which is again another definition which I embrace, when we say public art, we really think about art with a purpose, and things like site specificity and audience is taking into consideration while that art is being created. So it's not just putting it out into the public; is really understanding the space and who the audience, the intended audience is, and what what the message is you want for that audience. One is not necessarily better than the other. I don't think one is better than the other. I think just really thinking of them in different ways is helps out me when I'm defining the terms. So
It sounds as if, in terms of the ways that you both have described public art, the surrounding environment is so key for how we consider that concept. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role that environment and maybe communities play in the production and embrace of this art?
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if my relationship to public art is like in terms of the environment, um, is so much different than when I'm making not public art, actually. But I think for me there's a consideration of accessibility and thinking of like pathways and how people move in public space, and trying to make something that will invite them into an art experience. Um, so, yeah, that's sort of my orientation to environment.
and I'm gonna latch on to what Pamela said. And so when I'm talking to you in this voice from a commissioner of public art, not as an artist per se. And when looking at artists that we want to engage in public, this is exactly what we want, what you just described. And that is important because, I'm going to pick on you for a second. Yeah, in a good way.
Okay.
There's something important about what you have to say as an artist, and we want, we hope that you putting it out there and engaging in whatever the community is or whatever the space is, um, could reach, could inform whatever those many words are, that particular public, because um, your voice as an individual, however you describe yourself, is key and important for us to realize how diverse and you know and all that is within a public environment. In a way, in a sense, giving you ownership of that space, right? So that's a really weird, long way of answering that kind of question. I'm going to answer it in the second kind of way. So community is, you hear that term. If anybody's doing public art, and I see some of you in here have done public art, the word community is key to any of that stuff. And sometimes we, commissioners of public art, define that community, which could be wrong sometimes. And really understanding how your audience defines themselves as a community is going to be very key. And the dialogue between you and the audience to create that work is important in that um, you want people to take ownership of the work, not necessarily physical ownership, but feel that they're part of the work, they're part of the experience. It's meant for them on some level, and you've taken the opportunity to have that conversation with them. So, and I don't know if I've answered the question there, but
Yeah,
there's a lot there.
there is a lot there. I think one thing about audience with public art is there's like always a multiplicity of audiences, and this is something that I feel like I'm constantly navigating as I'm looking at different sites. You know, I think a lot about the people that live there, or the people that work there, but there's also like an art audience. Um, and with taking ownership of whatever you're putting in a place, I feel like part of the responsibility of public artists or artists working in the public is to find a way to bridge the audiences, um, and consider or make choices that consider how the two or multiple audiences will relate through your work. So I feel like that's part of the purpose, um, mandate.
So it seems to me that when public art first really became a thing, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is the National Endowment for the Arts was established in 1965, and then they commissioned their first public art piece 2 years later. And I feel that at first it was very much about activating a physical space. Except perhaps with titled arc. I always use that as an example of how not to do it. Um, and titled arc, the 1981 Robert Smith cinema. Is it Tilted Arc? Richard Serra. That it was in Folly Square, and it just like blocked. People were really enjoying the square, and then
Oh.
they put this piece there, and people couldn't have their lunch there anymore.
Yeah.
It was not a good activation of space. But I feel that more and more it's become about activating not so much the physical space. I mean, still the physical space as well, but also a mental space or an emotional space, right? And really using public art as a tool for social engagement. And my question is, how has, if at all, this shift been palpable to you, and particularly in relation to Black history? And what is the potential of public art to engage with Black history?
I'm going to start with this one. So, if you look at the history of public art in the United States, in New York City, particularly those that are sponsored by city government or that sort of thing. A lot of it was about embellishment, right? You had a great space, and it's to make it prettier. and a lot of those were done by your typical white men, right? So that was a so as time passed and as artists of color or different artists were given opportunities, that's when you begin to see what the conversations are about in the public art. As time passed and different things were happening in the world, and contemporary issues were again addressed in more public art. And so as opportunities arise in terms of who gets to create the work, the subject matter around the work was changing. So it no longer became about just making something pretty. It became about, we have this to say, this has been happening to us, and how can we express that in a way in public, in an art form. That's I think that's the shift you're recognizing. And there's another shift that's happening now in terms of representation, and how that representation happens. And there's a bit of tension in that as well for the newer public art that's coming. Um, and I'm being a little vague here, a little bit on purpose, but yeah. So that's I think what you've been seeing. Richard Serra, Tilted Art. That was about Richard Serra and his expression in that space, and because he was a well-known artist and all that, and that went on for 8 years to get it removed, and so what would happen? So when you started giving projects to people like Allison Sarr, what is she talking about in her artwork, and what so it's a very different conversation that began to happen as a result of who got to have a voice in public space.
Yes, I agree. Um, yeah,
And you're one of them.
yeah, I'm one of them. Um, I think in terms of navigating public space, as me, I think I don't know. One of the things that I'm reconciling with is just like the history of not of disempowered Black people in public space, and like we're talking about a shift in power and resources happening in recent years, but I've been thinking a lot about lynching lately. Um, a lot to think about, and um, lynchings as like landmarks in town squares, and um, Black, like violence against Black people as something that became public art, um, and sort of at this moment doesn't feel like a reconciliation completely, but it does feel like there's a potential to be restorative. Um, but yeah, I guess I think about public art a little more broadly than like artists making stuff.
And to that point, could you tell us a little bit about what the term Black history means to you and what it means to make this history visible in a public manner?
This was another stumper. Like, what is public art and what is Black history? These giant questions.
It's everything.
It's everything. It's everything. I mean, I was like thinking about this for a really long time. How do I define Black history? It's I think just sort of like any hyphenated American kind of indicates a marginalized position. It feels instantly marginalized, but again, this restoration of memory, and like a reclamation of what we consider history feels critical to Black history, the history of Black people, and um, Black History Month is a nice time to share stories. That's my favorite part of it.
So I don't. This was also a stumper, by the way. Yes. But so so and I'm gonna I was trying to think of it in the context of the work that I'm doing with other artists, addressing Black history. And what we've noticed or realized is that Black history isn't Black history. It's still happening now, right? So it's not. There's nothing historic about it, or historical about it. It's still the same issues that we were dealing with, back in the day. It's same things that we're dealing with now, right? And so it's it's still really relevant whenever artists are, you know, discussing it in a historical way. It's you could apply it to today, and it's no.
Okay, fine.
No, okay, okay. So let me. So I'm gonna be as specific as I can be. So I'm working on a project that is called In Pursuit of Freedom, right? And it was started a while ago with the as a historic remembrance type of situation. These the abolitionists was in pursuit of freedom, and whatever. And but as you and so what, as artists are dealing with the in pursuit of freedom, there's a realization that we have not gotten to the place of freedom completely. So we're still pursuing freedom. So something that was meant to be a historical, you know, memorial or historical reclamation or something like that is still happening. So it's unfair to say, well, it ended there, so let's memorialize it until then, because yesterday it was still happening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being more specific about that. Um, ok- I understand that, like, the relationship to justice, injustice feels very present. But what about things like hip hop turning 50 years old this year? Like, there are some things where the perspective shifts over time.
Yep, you're right. You're right.
I guess those are the things I think more about, rather than like the struggle.
And I think Carol Walker's work reminds us that the present is always haunted by the past and the future will be haunted by the present. But Kendall, what you're saying also makes me think of, what Jose Munoz wrote about queer identity, which is that queerness is something that is not yet here, but it's on the horizon. Um, there's one thing that I really want to talk about before we run out of time, and I was thinking about it as you were talking about, who gets the opportunity to create public art, and I wanted to bring up that public art is extremely expensive. It's expensive. And Pamela, I would love for you to talk about your experience with the Fountain for Survivors at Times Square, and because yeah, okay, if it's not permanent, and also how do you decide whether it's going to be permanent or temporary or ephemeral? Is performance art public art? Anyway, I'm going into a range of questions now,
Questions.
but then what do you do with it if it's temporary? Like, how are you going to store it? Who's going to pay for it? All of that stuff.
Okay. I can talk about that stuff. I'll get to the storage thing because everyone wants to talk
I
about
know
the
everybody
storage
asks
thing.
me.
But that my piece was only up for 7 weeks in Times Square, so it was very brief, and it was meant to be very brief. I think so. We kind of went from presenting it into like Pamela Council needs to figure out where to store this sculpture. So it's been one big conversation about care, which is exactly what I was concerned with when making the work. Um, the piece is a fountain for survivors, and it's this monumental scale fountain, 15 feet tall, housed inside of a shell that's covered in about 400,000 acrylic fingernails, all placed one by one in an irregular pattern. So it was a lot of figuring out how to put these small objects of care onto an asymmetrical, unusual form. So for me, the question about about money and things being expensive is why I came to fountains. You know, I was making a lot of textile work indoors, and my work is a lot of ancestral veneration and these dedications. And I found that when I was installing the textile work, which looks, it like intentionally looks worn or not expensive, even though it takes a high level of craft to produce this Devereux velvet, I felt like people were disrespecting my work, and it did not command like the kind of resources that I needed in order to feel cared for, especially as works of veneration. So fountains were like my tool to get the kind of care that I needed, because they require power, water, maintenance, maintenance. And so for me, it was a pivot into fountains that was like a call for more investment. So with this monumental scale fountain in Times Square being my first public artwork, and something that talks about care, you know, I call it a monument to maintaining, talks about care and calls for care, it felt like I did the thing that I had set out to do. And in terms of the aftercare part, I'm learning how to be a steward of a giant thing now, which is what happens when you have a kid or you buy a house or you build a 24-foot wide pink bubble covered in acrylic nails. You got to figure it out. And it's not, there's no blueprint for how to make that thing or how to take care of it. So, like, I'm super empowered to be able to figure out, like, what that looks like. Blaze a new path.
I will say I will take that over children any day.
Well, why not both? I don't know.
Kendall, what is your
So yeah, there's a lot of questions there, but yeah, money is always, and I heard somebody gasp or whenever you said the money thing, but yeah, money is always an issue, right? Particularly when it comes to public art. But I always encourage artists who want to sort of delve into the idea of public art to really come up with a really strong concept, and many concepts could be realized in many different ways on the cheaper end, and then of course the more expensive end. I think what is important about experimenting with the public realm is that you get to understand what it means to put work out there and how people interact with it, or and you could theorize what would happen, but in reality that may change completely. In terms of temporary versus permanent, again more technical terms. So our for the city, something is temporary if it's up for less than a year, and if it's permanent, it's longer, and there's a lot of different processes that happen around that. I think temporary public art is very key in that we could address contemporary issues easily. Whereas, whether it be a parade or a protest or whatever, you could, it could be put together quickly. It could happen, and you addressing the issue at hand. With permanent art, it takes a little bit more time, and then the meaning it's up for 30 years, 20 years, 5 years, whatever. That meaning may change depending on what's happening around it. So a different kind of care is taking into that. Um, there's more mechanisms in place to do more permanent stuff than there is temporary work, unfortunately. We have a number of programs within the city. Many cities have them, percent for art programs, where they take a percentage of a construction project and then they commission a permanent work of art. That money can't be used for temporary art. It has to, for technical terms, for technical reasons, it can't be. So yeah, and I threw a lot out you there, so I don't know if I've answered my question, but yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How does the city define permanent?
More than a year.
Oh,
That's it. Yeah,
interesting. Okay.
that's it.
So even
But
if it's up for 2 years, it's permanent.
it's permanent. It's again very technical. So let me correct that. So if it's an artwork on a permanent structure more than a year, it's permanent. If it's an artwork on a temporary structure for many years, it's temporary. Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So, and if it's permanent, then it has to go through many different approval processes, which of course is just in and of itself a challenge. So if it's temporary, not so much. You just have an approval of whomever, and it goes up, it comes down. And again, the materials and what you use and whatnot. So, and something that you mentioned, maintenance, that controls everything. You know, one, is it what does it take to maintain a work? Who is going to maintain that? Because money's attached to that as well. And that may be one of the reasons why you have trouble locating the fountain there, is because there's a lot of issues that come around taking
Oh,
care of it.
I mean, it is high maintenance. It is high maintenance. Like, that's the whole object, you know.
Yeah.
It's like a monument filled with manicures. It's like so high maintenance,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting, the temporary permanent thing. I feel like if I look at that, I could find a loophole, which excites me.
Well, let's figure out a loophole. Let's figure that out.
I would love that. It also strikes me when you both speak about maintenance that there's a lot of trust and vulnerability involved in the process. Can you give us a little insight into those two aspects in the production of this art?
So there's a number of things there. There's trust, vulnerability, maintenance. Um, so one of the tricks that we do in commissioning a work of art is that ownership is we who the people the place that we commission it for. We want to make sure that the audience or the stewards of the public space takes ownership of that work. Back in the day, we the idea of what a successful public artwork was if it was there the next day after you put it in, right? If it was not tagged or destroyed, or that meant, oh, they like it, so they want to keep it. Now we purposefully engage, so that the audience, so the public, so the stewards of the space take ownership of it. And for that to happen, the individuals or the groups have to trust that you are sincere about providing them with something, and then the maintenance comes in quite easily, in that if it's yours, if you feel that it's yours, you want to take care of it, right? Even if it's in a public space. So it all kind of connects, and but it takes quite a bit of time and energy and to make that happen. So
That's something that I'm still learning about, just through looking at other people's work and how people treat it, through the whole process, from proposal to the daily maintenance.
Kendall, when you mentioned successful, it also um, reminded me that I wanted to ask you both, and perhaps here you could both speak as artists, because Kendall is an artist as well. How do you measure success versus failure when it comes to public art, especially since those two things are these binaries that are actually quite heteronormative? When I mean, sometimes it's the best thing for something to fail. What makes it? What is, I guess my question is, when do you feel that you have achieved the thing that you wanted to achieve with a piece of public art, or any piece of art, really?
Yeah, I can think about that. It's hard for me to think about failure because I'm like, I don't know. Like, as an emerging artist that like dreams super big and actually makes some big stuff happen, like delusion is, critical. or manifesting. I don't know. There's a lot of ways to like frame it, but a strong strong sense of delusion is necessary for me. So failure like does not exist. But I do feel like a work is successful when, within my praxis, it's about dedication, and I'm the primary audience, even with public art. So if I like it, I feel like it's successful. And then when people who identify with whatever it's dedicated to connect with it, I feel like it's successful. Yeah, with the Times Square fountain for survivors, like it opened in October and breast cancer survivors met there to start their walks. And domestic violence shelters made field trips there. Um, and I heard from people who like came and made a wish using this coin that I invented to make wishes in it. And their wish came true. And it was like a lot of survival related wishes. And I mean, a wish coming true, like that is success. That's like it's magic. So I'm happy.
My story's not that great. So I have an entire presentation of failures because I have learned a lot from them. Yeah, and some of them are huge. I mean, articles are written about them, failures. But so that's one part, learning from the failures to understand what needs to happen moving forward. In terms of success, sometimes that's hard to gauge in a public artwork because once it's out into the public, and how do you find out if it was successful or not? So one of the things that I try to do is before the work is even created, I ask the question is why is this work being created? You know, what is this art meant to do? And use that as a gauge in terms of the response that you get from creating the work. So if it's, you know, I want people to smile, or I wanted to, you know, address this particular issue, or get people in, whatever it is. And so it's easier to gauge that way when you start with a question that you want the work to answer.
Why is this work being created? My question, I sort of have a similar thing with a question, which I think is a great design directive. And my question came out of like these survivor interviews, and it was, what do you need? Like I asked people, what is the one thing you want to ask all survivors, and what do you need? And I realized that's like a good, design question. So now when I go to a site, I'm like, what is this trying to feel? What does this site need? And yeah, if I feel like I answered that,
And you know, I said it earlier, but that approach, how you just described it, is a very site responsive kind of approach, and I think it's core to a successful public artwork.
Ironically, you both just answered my next question. So how much time do we have? I don't have my watch on me. Okay, so we have time for maybe one last quick question. Um, you both have mentioned the role of the artist trying to connect people with both memory and history. Why? What does that role involve, and why does it matter? Big ending question.
Well, I'm going to try to answer the why does it matter part. Um, so I think, and I was going to answer it a particular way. I'm trying to change how I'm going to answer that. So that's what. Yeah, I think it matters because the way I see artists is that they are creative thinkers. They are the soul of any society. They are creators of ways of speaking of new experiences and languages that are easily accessible on many different levels, whether it be a sculptor or musician. You know, they expose us in ways that we are in new ways. They give us things that we expect in ways that are unexpected. So that is the why it matters. And also too is, you know, artists have we need to hear from other people other than the typical in any topic, you know, and pairing artists with, you know, scientists, and that's happening a lot right now. You know, all the fields are reaching out to artists because, you know, they see, let me do the we see the world in a different way. We give access in other ways that are inaccessible sometimes. And so you know, I encourage any of you who have are in a position to of power of any kind, you know, tap into those artists to work on anything that you're working with. I'm going to do a little plug for a program that I run called PEER, Public Artists in Residence, where we embed artists in city government to influence policy. And this program is going on forever is because it has been successful. And again, because artists again are these creative thinkers in ways that are least expected. So that is the why.
I think that was a great answer, Kendall. I think it made me think of this. One of the reasons why I think art is so important, and I mean, by making memory public, you're acknowledging people, and that is important in society for people to feel seen and acknowledged, and to feel acknowledged, particularly within public space, among all the carceral architecture of the places that we live in. There's something that we do as artists that that allows us to deal with Black history in particular differently, which is we work beyond the English language, which I find really restricts a sort of bodily connection to history and memory. So I think that through art, we're able to connect with people's bodies and people's like sense experiences and validate their sense of history in that way, in a way that language doesn't accommodate.
Well, thank you both for such a fascinating conversation. I feel like I took a lot away from it. Are there any questions?
And maybe you meant like simply that when you put an artwork out into a public space, you don't know who's going to encounter it. But, and I maybe you've already sort of answered this with the beautiful stories that you told about survivors. But I wonder, in either of your case, if there are sort of chance encounters that have come out of public art that you've created or placed that that you might add.
That's the best part, where you experience things that you when you create a work, you kind of theorize how people are going to interact with it, and if you hang around it enough, you get to see how how people interact with it in a very positive way, how things that you totally didn't think could happen, and you see this over and over again. And the reason why I'm in public art right now is because of just that, how it has literally I've seen public artwork specifically change communities and change neighborhoods. If you see the progression of it for a while, so when you talked about these women coming and starting the runs there, whatever, that was just that idea that you put this there and they felt that it was theirs to use and interact with, and
It was theirs.
you can't pay for that. This is priceless stuff, and we don't get to see half of that, that's happening when we're not around art pieces. Once in a while you hear about it, and people find you to tell you about it, particularly when it's positive. So
Yeah, for me, just going incognito and listening to people, coming to understand the work. These two teenage boys like smoking weed on a Saturday night, and one's like, "That's like a pink blob," and the other is like, "No, it's a fountain for survivors." Like, we're in a pandemic, we're all survivors, and I was like, yes, yes. He's paying attention, and he's engaging with art, like even while he's doing whatever he does on a Saturday night, and that is exciting to me, because I know I could not reach those boys in a gallery.
Any other questions?
You're talking about these two boys, you couldn't reach them in a gallery, they wouldn't go to a gallery. That's the whole point. The point is, it's an American problem that most average Americans believe that art is for the rich and it is not for everybody else. So they don't even think about going to a gallery. They don't think about going to a museum. So doing public art, if you can, particularly in marginalized communities, makes a difference because they get to see something that they might identify with, they might like, or just question.
Or dislike, or feel something.
That's true.
Yep.
I've experienced that too. My first public art piece, someone who I knew actually went on a campaign to stop it.
Ooh, rude.
And it got ugly. And to the point where it's like, well, if you don't like it, why don't you put up a piece? No, I don't want to do that. Oh, you don't want to do that. And why are you criticizing this? It's not going to be up there forever. It's only going to be there for 3 months. But it got ugly to the point was like, if you're not going to pay for it, if you're not going to help, then please be, and I'm being nice now, be quiet. Because this is hard work. And that's the other thing, is that in communities of color, it is very difficult to get public art up, particularly temporary, because there's no investors to actually help you put that artwork up. So
Yeah,
I
that
just wanted to say that.
that whole thing, that issue of like where things get placed has been super sticky for me. Meeting with nonprofits from different cities, a lot of people are like, can you come and put this thing in whatever hood, you know? And I'm like, I'm not from there. Like, I'm not from that hood. Isn't there an artist there? Isn't there some way you can invest there? And like, so I don't, like, why are you calling on me to negotiate that relationship? The community siting is so challenging. And I'm sorry that happened to you with someone you knew. Oh, you're fine now? You worked it out? Wow. It'd be over for me.
Well, on that note, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for this great conversation, our wonderful audience, and I will pass it back to Valerie Paley.
Yes, I encourage you all to partake of our food and drink and to check out a very early sneak peek of the Kara Walker show yonder. Thanks so much for coming, and come again, please, sometime soon. Bye.
Thank you.